Today's broadcast is actually the audio of a recent video conversation on YouTube with Monica Miller. If you'd like to watch the exchange, the YouTube link is in the description box of this show.
Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The Thinking Atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth, not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist podcast, hosted by Seth Andrews.
In light of the recent ruling from the Supreme Court, I wanted to talk to an expert, someone who had been a part of this story for the last several years. My first thought, of course, was to talk to Monica Miller, Senior Counsel for the American Humanist Association. She's kind enough to join me here. Monica, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Has to be a little discouraging on this end after the ruling came down, right?
Yeah, we were expecting a loss, but we were hoping for a narrow one, and we did get a narrow, fragmented ruling that's very difficult to apply for future cases. So it's small victory and a big loss kind of thing. Okay, well, paint the picture for those who are watching from the outside. I know I have an international audience, although church-state issues really are relatable to a great many people outside the United States as well as in. What happened and how did it happen? So several years ago, we received several complaints from local citizens about a giant 40-foot Latin cross in the middle of a very busy intersection in Prince George's County, Maryland, in the town of Bladensburg. We investigated it, and it turned out it was definitely owned and funded by the government, the local government. So we sent a letter saying, look, you need to remove this. It violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. If you don't sell the land to private property or private entity, then we will have no choice but to sue you. They refused to take any sort of remedial action. So we did file a lawsuit. We won our case in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. They found that the cross obviously has the effect of conveying a message that the government endorses Christianity and favors Christians over non-Christians. But then our opponents took the case up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, well, this is an interesting case for one major reason for me. I noticed when I was reading the ruling from the Supreme Court that this was not an instance that they've used when it comes to God on the money. It's historical. It's a cultural thing. It's not really a religious symbol. I didn't see that as much as it actually is a religious symbol, but the act of removing it would be considered an act of hostility toward a religion, and that would be unconstitutional. Did you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. What I said in oral argument, I believe firmly holds true, which is that the idea that removing a religious symbol is hostile to religion has been rejected by the Supreme Court in numerous cases, since the 60s. It's an argument that's never really made its way into a majority opinion before, like it had in this opinion. It's very unfortunate because, I said in oral argument that removing a cross would only have the effect of restoring the government to neutrality. It would send the message that Christianity can't be preferred. Frankly, we didn't even ask the court to remove the cross. We actually just asked, we were accepting, we proposed several remedies, one of which would involve just transferring the land underneath the cross to the American Legion or some private entity. So the cross itself didn't even have to be removed. But that being said, the ruling was very fractured. You actually had 7 separate opinions. The majority there was no majority on any sort of test or rule. I think the hostility thing was part of the pluralities ruling, meaning only 4 justices signed on to that portion. Justice Breyer had a completely different reason. So did Kagan. So you had which is good for us because it means you can't really apply the case in future cases. But yes, definitely the argument that it's hostile to religion to remove a religious symbol has never been the test in the Supreme Court.
Even Ginsburg, right, in her dissent, did she read her dissent aloud? How did that work?
She did, and apparently it's rather unusual to read the dissent from the bench. And so her doing that was actually a statement in and of itself. It showed how powerful, how strongly against the ruling she was. And it's interesting, too, because her late husband was actually a veteran, I believe. And obviously she's Jewish, and she spoke to the obvious fact that the cross doesn't represent Jewish veterans, certainly doesn't represent atheist veterans or Muslim veterans. And that was, in effect, what the majority had held, or concluded anyway.
Monica, I'm preparing a presentation that I'm going to be given later on in the year, and I photoshopped out that cross in Bradenton, and I photoshopped in the Star and Crescent from Islam as a symbol, and said, I am sure that the people who were saying that this is, it is part of our heritage, it is an honor of the troops. I'm sure those same people wouldn't lift a finger of protest if it was an Islamic monument or if it was a Hindu monument, etc., right?
Right, of course not. No, they would leave it up, and we would, have the same fight.
Yeah. So you walk into the you walk into the hall. You're there. You are now, this is not hyperbole.
Yeah.
You're part of history, Monica. You walked in there and you must have looked around and had an oh shit moment, right? Like, what's going on in your skull?
Yeah, it was intimidating. I was sort of, focused on what I needed to do. So it was kind of surreal. I'm on the bench and I'm just what felt like feet away from all the justices, and Ginsburg is kind of just right there. So I kind of kept trying to not look at her because I knew it would freak me out. And there was a moment where I saw her kind of like peer over to look down, because she was kind of down like this. So she had to look over, and she kind of like smirked and sort of smiled at me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to just put myself somewhere else, because it was really like, she's obviously such an icon, and I respect her immensely. So I just kind of looked over at Gorsuch.
Let's talk about the religiosity of the Supreme Court. In my research, I was going over, and it's like you've got 6 Catholics, except for one. I think Gorsuch is like Episcopal, which is Catholic light, in my opinion. And then there are 3 who hold to Judaism. But as we well know, Judaism is largely secular, right? Was it more than half of people who are adherents to some form of Judaism actually don't hold to the supernatural? I suspect, Ginsburg may be among them. I don't know. But we see, these religious ideas, religious foundations being brought into an arena that's supposed to operate by the rule of law, by an honest and fair interpretation of law. And yet, we look at kind of a religious party. Is that an overstatement, you think, or no?
I don't think it's an overstatement. I think certainly the justices' religious backgrounds and beliefs played a factor in this case. Now, of course, we have Justice Breyer and Justice Kagan who signed on to the opinion. Like I said, they did so for very different reasons. In fact, Justice Kagan had, in her role as the Attorney General, defended a cross on government land in the Mojave Desert. So she actually already had probably preformed views about war memorial crosses. And because she had to argue in favor of the cross, I think she had a lot of, I don't want to say biases, but preconceived ideas of the appropriateness of a cross in a war memorial. Otherwise, if she hadn't been involved in that case. Justice Breyer, we know his views on history. He had a long opinion in Van Orden about Van Orden involved a Ten Commandments monument, about how it was allowed to stand because it was it was old, basically. So it wasn't surprising to see them join the opinion in terms of upholding the cross, even though they're Jewish. But it was disappointing, sure.
You've been watching this stuff with the Ten Commandments monuments. We went through it here in Oklahoma 4 years ago. It was ruled by our state Supreme Court as unconstitutional, so they had to remove it, right? The Ten Commandments on the state capitol grounds. Yeah. Too much wailing and gnashing of teeth, this happened. And now we're looking at Arkansas. You got Raypert over there going to head with the Satanic Temple over the Ten Commandments and the Baphomet statue. Has the have you guys gotten into any of those Ten Commandments fights as well?
Yeah, actually, we are counsel of record in that Arkansas Ten Commandments case. The Satanists intervened in the case, but we we were assenting to their joining the case.
Oh, so they brought you in to sort of take over? Or?
We brought that. The American Humanist Association, along with FFRF and some local free thought groups, have joined. I'm counsel of record. Patrick over at FFRF is counsel of record. And our argument is that the monument needs to be removed. The Satanists came in as an intervener, so a third party, to say, if it's not removed, we want our monument up. And we're okay with that as sort of the alternative. So if we don't win, we're happy with them winning, if that makes sense. We have different angles in the case, but we're on the same side.
Oh, forgive me for not knowing. I knew that TST was involved, and
they get more press with this with the block.
Is that? I mean, I know they're flashier. They're certainly more controversial in the state of Arkansas, which I think they really, really, really love.
Yeah.
Of course,
it's great. It's great stuff.
The Satanic. Well, I was going to ask you your opinion about the Satanic Temple. Now that they've been recognized as a religion, they're starting to sort of turn religious or Christian privilege on its ear, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really admire the work that they do, because we run into these roadblocks a lot in, in the public school setting and in various settings where a government entity, school district, will claim to have an open forum where anyone can come in with, their pamphlets or their school clubs, after school clubs. And the problem is, a lot of these areas, there's not any atheist groups or smaller groups, and it really kind of forces the school districts to actually apply the principle. If it's an open forum, then the Satanists got to come in. So I think they do a great job, putting pressure on governments and showing them what it's like to be someone who objects to, a religious symbol on government property.
Is it a historical argument to keep the Ten Commandments? Like it's lost all religious significance, which is what they say about "In God We Trust." What's the reasoning to keep it on Capitol grounds? So there isn't one. The Ten Commandments cases are interesting because you have to remember, in the Supreme Court land, there was 2 Ten Commandments cases. One was the Van Orden decision, and the other one was the Allegheny decision. Allegheny said that the McCreary County decision, and those 2 were decided on the same day. And McCreary County decision said the Ten Commandments has to go, and that was 5 justices, Breyer, joining them. The same day, they say this one in Texas can stay. The difference being that the McCreary County display was new, and it was also motivated primarily by a religious purpose, which was evidenced by statements from the government officials at the ceremony for the unveiling. Whereas in the Texas case, there was less evidence of a overt religious purpose. The Fraternal Order of Eagles put it up for juvenile delinquency reasons, and it had been there for 40 years unchallenged. So to Justice Breyer, who is the controlling opinion in that case, that 40 years was, in his mind, not dispositive, but underscoring that it wasn't perceived as religious by people. The logic doesn't make sense to me at all. There's many reasons why atheist Texans wouldn't want to challenge a Ten Commandments monument in federal court. They get no money. They get a lot of hate. It's dangerous. So I hate his reasoning, but that's how you can reconcile those 2 cases. I had somebody in the chat room say they think this is maybe the wrong fight. These are the wrong hills to fight on. And I've heard variations of this whenever we see, should you have a nativity scene at Christmas on taxpayer-funded property? And people like you and I are like, hell no, there's plenty of private property. It's actually, this is a divisive exercise. This excludes people. But what would you say to those who are arguing that maybe this is the wrong fight at the wrong time?
Well, the timing issue is interesting because something people don't really understand is how long litigation takes. So when we filed our cross case, for example, it was when Obama was the president. Like I said, we won in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The odds of the Supreme Court taking up a case like this was very minimal because of a lot of factors. One was the fact that there was, the precedent was overwhelmingly in our favor. There was something like 11 cross cases decided by courts of appeals, and they all went in our direction. So there was no good reason for us to perceive a Supreme Court taking this case. With respect to the Ten Commandments and, not the timing issue, but the kind of overall picture issue, I can understand that viewpoint before I kind of was in this movement and an attorney for these cases. I'm from California. The religion isn't a very divisive thing here. A lot of people are secular. If they're religious, they're not, it's not sort of the Bible Belt type of religion. So I can see someone, say, sitting from here or New York or somewhere else that's more progressive, saying, what's the big deal? People in these communities, like in Arkansas, atheists, Jews, people of minority religions feel very marginalized as it is. And so when you have your own government year after year putting up this nativity scene, it's kind of just this constant reminder that you're not in the in-group, or you're being excluded, or it's pressuring your children to they grow up around it. And then when they have their school teachers and their, mayor promoting Christianity, it's hard to feel like you're going to be able to shield your kid, raise your kids the way you want to. And so there's a lot of reasons why when you're on the ground in these communities where there's a giant 40-foot cross that you have to pass every single day, especially if you're a veteran and you feel like it's a disrespect, it's a dishonor to your service because your symbol isn't there. You have to talk to those people, I think, to really understand why this is important. And it's also about the principles we're upholding. It's not necessarily about the cross. It's about separation of church and state. It's not about, that one school prayer. It's about making sure that governments are held accountable for constitutional violations. So they might seem small, but the principles are big.
There's a water tower in a suburb of Tulsa, and it's got a church on it, First Baptist Church. And I go through two phases. The first is, that's taxpayer-funded public property for the entire suburb. And it shouldn't have a church's name on it. Like, I go through this. And then part of me is like, if I raise a hand about it and if I protest it formally,
right,
culturally, I'm immediately the pariah, right? I feel like I'm an outcast, and how could you? It's just a water tower.
Right.
And you probably see that quite a bit. It's just a plastic baby Jesus on the courthouse steps. It's just a piece of granite. It's just a symbol. It's just a cross somewhere. I mean, you go through a lot of that, yeah?
Yes, I do. And I think James Madison, one of the authors of the First Amendment, actually has a fantastic response to this. I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim, but it's something about, today what might seem like a trickling stream will soon become a raging torrent. And I think if you watch shows like The Handmaid's Tale, obviously it's sort of fiction, but it is fiction. But it's the small things that can snowball. And if we're not here to say, no, you can't prefer Christianity in this one form, maybe it's a small cross or maybe a little symbol on a water tower, they're going to keep slipping and slipping and slipping to see what they can get away with. And I think we're already really, really far down that road when you see what's happening both at the Supreme Court and in the legislative branches, both state and federal government. It's inching, maybe baby steps, but towards some really big separation of church and state problems. So, we have to be there to sort of, you can't take on cases that aren't going to win. So there's certain things we just can't challenge, and there's certain things that we can. And so I think part of it is just focusing on things, especially right now with the way court is, on the things that we can, where there is precedent, where there's a very little likelihood that the case will be overturned.
I'm going to get into how to contact you if somebody has a potential dog in this fight. But I have to go. You mentioned The Handmaid's Tale. Are you caught up on The Handmaid's Tale?
If it started already, like the next season, I haven't watched the next season, but I was caught up from the last season.
How are we supposed to talk if you're not caught up?
I know.
I'm so freaking hooked.
Busy.
Like at the end of the episode, are you tired from the stress, but you can't wait till next week? Because that's the phenomenon Natalie and I have.
Yeah, I'm glad I actually didn't start watching it until after my Supreme Court case, like after the oral argument, because I feel like and I had a lot of friends kind of shocked that I hadn't watched it because it is really about separation of church and state in our country. And it wasn't until I watched a preview for this upcoming season where they took the national monument, in Washington, D.C., and I think it was a Super Bowl ad, and they turned it into a cross. And I saw the handmaids kind of walking in line next, on the National Mall with this cross. And I just thought, oh my gosh, it felt like my case. And I was like, I have to watch this. I wonder why, what's going on. And so it's depressing because you kind of feel like, oh my gosh, is this where we're headed? obviously, I mean, I'd like to think, obviously, no, it's not going to be that dramatic and that extreme, but it does reinforce the need to be protecting separation of church and state at every angle and at every opportunity that we can.
It's sobering. You see religious imagery. You see so much oppression that is done in the name of God. I mean, you invoke God and you literally get away with murder. It's a hugely patriarchal system that speaks to the attempts, and often successful attempts, by the evangelical right to control women, their reproductive rights, all that stuff. We just saw what happened down in Alabama. You want to speak to that? You know, the abortion thing is just insane.
It is insane. I mean, that's when I really started seeing the strongest parallels with Handmaid's Tale, obviously. But those are the kind of things that we have some control over, you know, with litigation. I know Planned Parenthood and ACLU are doing a really good job with that stuff.
There's some lawsuits filed, are there not? Or I know ACLU was going to file.
Yes, I think they did. I haven't checked, but I think they filed something there.
We're looking at some serious legal battles are in front of us that are going to go on the order of years. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that's what they want. I mean, they're baiting us. They want us to file suits so that they can overturn Roe versus Wade. I mean, that's the point. You know, I'd like to think that the Supreme Court isn't there. They had an opportunity, for instance, in my case, to overturn the Lemon versus Kurtzman test, and they didn't. There was not five votes on even limiting Lemon in religious display cases. There's a lot of language we would call dicta that would imply that, at least in longstanding religious display cases, that meaning, you know, old ones, Lemon might not apply. That's the test we've been using for decades. But they didn't overturn it. So I'd like to think that it won't happen, but I don't know, and it's scary. It's
interesting. I was talking to Andrew up at FFRF about the same. And I think Andrew Torres over at Opening Arguments, just any attorney I can get my hands on, going, do you think Roe v. Wade's going to go down? Do you think it's when it goes to the top with these conservatives sort of being infused into the highest court in the land? How screwed are we? But your take is you're cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. And I think that's just my attitude in general. I think it would be really hard to be in this world, you know, this litigation world, if I didn't hold sort of some optimism. I mean, it's not unreasonable optimism, but it's like kind of hope. If I didn't have that, it would be really just, I don't know, depressing. It'd be hard to kind of get up and do this work every day because you just feel like you're spinning your wheels. And I knew that going into the Supreme Court one, when they took the case, I knew I had zero chance of actually winning and them striking down the cross. My whole goal was to make sure that I preserved as much precedent and this Lemon test as possible. And I did achieve that. So, you know, that's kind of, I try to set reasonable expectations and meet those. And, you know, yeah, I just think that the Roe versus Wade thing, I mean, it's a very technical kind of case. And, you know, it's hard for me to see them overturning it. They'll probably chip away at it like they've been doing with our Lemon test in the Establishment Clause world. But
does the law work that way? A death by 1,000 cuts? They can go in and sort of hamstring Roe v. Wade while keeping it in place?
It can do that, yeah. Right. I hope not, but yeah.
There is an article. Let me see if I can share my screen with the video viewers from The Economist. The headline probably says it all. The Supreme Court blesses a cross-shaped war memorial in Maryland. How much of this, in your opinion, I know it's a subjective opinion, how much of this is about the evangelical right feeling empowered in the Trump administration?
I think it's a lot to do with that. If you saw the amicus briefs filed in our case, a lot of them were very, very Bible Belt religious right groups. Republicans, I think Republicans from the United States Senate and the House filed an amicus brief. It's very political. It's very, you know, one type of religion. We had amicus briefs from Christian groups, national Christian groups and churches representing millions of Christians across the country that were on our side, that said, we don't want the government co-opting our symbol, our most sacred symbol. We don't want the government telling us what it means. We don't want the government We don't want the Supreme Court trying to interpret it and distort its meaning. Alito did exactly that in his opinion. He writes that the cross can be secularized and have a non-Christian meaning. It can actually represent Muslims and atheists and so forth. That's exactly what these Christians didn't want happening. And I think I hate to say authentic Christians and political Christians, but I think there's absolutely politics and sort of, the oppression side of things, and then this sort of earnest individuals who want to keep their faith private and want to keep their faith faithful. I don't know about
I get that. I mean, it's interesting that there are a lot of people who are devout believers in religion who still want church-state separation. I mean, they are in many ways standing shoulder to shoulder with the American Humanist Association and SCA, the Secular Coalition for America, et cetera. And that's news to a lot of atheists. They think all the Christians want Christian privilege. Right. And that's not the case.
It's not, like I said, millions. I looked up these organizations and entities, because some of them I'm just not that familiar with, like, the different Christian sects as it pertains to some of these. So it was like the Methodist, the main Methodist group, and I think the Baptist Joint Committee committee, the BJC, fantastic group, super in support of separation of church and state. They were there at the courthouse with me, giving press speeches and stuff to say that Christians are not, many Christians believe in want separation of church and state, and don't want the government using their religious symbols. So I felt like they were a really good voice to have with us that day, because I think you're right. A lot of people see it as an atheist versus Christian issue, when in fact it's a separation of church and state issue that benefits everyone.
That's an angle I hadn't considered until I'd seen some protests by the fundamentalists saying, oh, God, now they're secularizing the cross. They're taking religious meaning away from our religious symbol, and they just lost their minds. And I didn't see that one coming. It
was there in these amicus briefs. They warned the Supreme Court. They said, and I think it is like sort of a sectarian divide. Maybe it's also a little bit of a political divide, but I think there are Christians that want the government. They kind of want a Handmaid's Tale sort of future. They want that,
they see it as a moral fight, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of them, and others, I think it's about power. I think it's about control.
That's what I mean. Yeah, the power. When I think of Handmaid's Tale, I think of the power and the oppression.
Franklin Graham. Someone else explained how Franklin Graham and Paula White and James Dobson and all these other cats can go stand shoulder to shoulder with a man who is essentially the antithesis of the best teachings of Jesus Christ in the Bible that they preach, right?
Right.
It's got to be about power. So
it is. I think so, too.
Monica Miller, Senior Counsel with the American Humanist Association. You got time to take a phone call and see what our listeners have to say?
Sure.
I've got on the switchboard 786. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast with Monica Miller. Who's this?
Hi, my name is Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. What do you have for the show? Comment or question? What do you think?
Kind of a comment, kind of a question. It's a little bit of both. I was actually wanting Monica's opinion on the states that are trying to introduce Bible literacy classes into public schools. I live in the state of Florida, and they've been pushing for this for about 2 years now. Monica?
Yeah, I mean, we've been keeping our eye on it, and we're definitely kind of standing ready to file a lawsuit. It's one of those things where the Supreme Court has basically said that the schools can teach about religion, so they can teach you, Christianity is a religion and Christians believe this and Jews believe this. They can't say Jesus walked on water. They can't teach history as or religion as historical fact. And so what we have been waiting to see is kind of like those lesson plans, what is actually being taught, anecdotes, witness testimony from students that are in these courses. Frankly, if your school allows it, or if you can get away with it, getting tape recording, or I guess your phone recording, I don't know what you call it now, of the lessons when the teacher's teaching, and it's going to be something that sounds like they will be crossing that line between teaching about religion versus preaching religion or teaching it as fact. So we're very much aware of it. There's little we can do, especially in this court system that we have right now with the way the Supreme Court is. We don't want to rush into a lawsuit without having those kind of facts. Right now, I think the bills are just being passed. We want to see how they're implemented. But
are you facing that in your own home state, the Bible classes or the potential Bible classes?
Yeah, I'm actually a future educator in the state of Florida, and I mean, I want to teach high school, and I took a world religions class in high school, which kind of opened my eyes to all of these people believe all these things. Are you really sure it's not one thing? That kind of brought me to where I am now. And I just found it to be really interesting that rather than it just being a historical mythology class, that it has to specifically be a Bible literacy course.
Yeah. It's tricky. I think, yeah, like I said, it would be important to see how it's implemented. I took a world religions class, and I think for me that actually maybe, like what you were just saying, kind of opened my eyes to more atheism, because I felt like and it was in high school, but it was how can all of these religions be right? They all hold the same convictions, and I felt like it made it more apparent that religion was an accident of birth, where you're born. So to me, taking that class was kind of useful in my path to atheism and humanism. However, if they are, like you said, just teaching the Christian Bible and nothing else, it's very frustrating, because I know what they're doing. They're taking what we call dicta, a portion of a Supreme Court opinion, and running with it. And so there's an opinion from the 60s where the Supreme Court said, you can't read daily devotionals from the Bible every morning. That's what the school is doing. That's unconstitutional. In a footnote, the court says, however, you could teach, the Bible objectively, like I said, or, something about Christianity. I think they even alluded to a Bible literacy course as something that might be acceptable. And so I think what some, religious right people did is they saw that footnote. They said the Supreme Court said we can do this, and they're just seeing how far they can get away with things. So like I said, we don't want to be hasty with this kind of lawsuit, because it's very nuanced. It's a gray area of teaching religion versus preaching it. So we want to see what those facts are. But I really appreciate you asking that question and being aware of it. And if you feel like that line has been crossed and you're, at your school district or another one, feel free to email us at AHA, because we can look into it.
I'll make sure to throw the contact information in the broadcast and have Monica throw it out before we finish here. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for calling. Appreciate you. We'll take a real quick break. When I come back, it's more with Monica Miller, Senior Counsel at the American Humanist Association, about the cross, Christian privilege, and more of your calls on the other side of this. A reminder, I'm going to be co-hosting the Atheist Experience this Sunday with Matt Dillahunty. Looking forward to going down to Austin for that. And of course, it'll be streamed live, or they have a live audience if you're near the Austin area. The Atheist Experience this Sunday, July the 7th. I'll see you there. Talking right now with Monica Miller. She's Senior Counsel at the American Humanist Association. We're talking about this Bladensburg, Maryland cross and the Pensacola cross and these religious symbols on taxpayer-funded property and Christian nationalism, Christian privilege here in the United States and beyond. I want to speak to something that has been happening sort of in my own. We talked a little bit about this just off air before we started here, but I host the Thinking Atheist, which is an icon that rejects faith and encourages everyone to let's think, let's use reason, let's not just fake it till we make it, right? The Thinking Atheist. But atheism really speaks about the gods I don't believe in. It's not proactive. It doesn't really describe what I am for. So more and more I use the word humanist. Mm-hmm. American Humanist Association. Talk to me about the mission of your organization in that context.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it, that we are atheists for the most part. I think there are some people who join our organization who aren't, but we focus on what we do believe in, and that's progressive values, that's science, using rational thought. So kind of like what you were saying about the rational side of things, but we, rather than, necessarily picking apart religion, doesn't mean we don't have, religious critiques as part of our, the philosophical side, but we try to focus our energy and our organizational efforts on, Black Lives Matter, women's rights, environmental issues. I'm personally a strong animal advocate. I actually have another job at the Non-Human Rights Project where we're trying to get personhood for animals. So, the focus is, reproductive rights, really, everything that we kind of consider an important progressive cause. The American Humanist Association is on it. And we have this, more of the philosophical side of things where we have a lot of literature and academia that's gone into what is humanism and the thought of humanism. And we have then the activist side where we are on the ground kind of putting those values into place.
It's funny, I was a Fox News Christian. And then when I rejected faith, I drifted to much more liberal progressive positions. I guess that's pretty common, right? I mean, because so much of what I believed as a Fox News conservative, a Rush Limbaugh conservative, was based in this God and country narrative. Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that we are fighting against the most is this God and country concept. I mean, we have our Don't Say the Pledge campaign where we encourage students to know their constitutional right to not stand up for the pledge, because I think it starts in the schools. This early indoctrination of God and country are instantly associated in public schools across the country that have to say the pledge every day. Then you get these Christian monuments, the Bladensburg cross, where every day, because it's a war memorial, and on the base of it, it says valor, courage, endurance, I think strength, these military terms, you're associating Christianity with valor, with courage, with this, and by inference, not Judaism, not atheism, not Islam, you're associating Christianity with that. And I think that the government makes a lot of efforts to draw that association, God and country, and pin us as the secularists. They like to use that word a lot. And they say it pejoratively, and it's odd to me because I think we should all be secularists in our approach to our country. I mean, that's why America stands out. That's why America was sort of formed, was to be a secular democracy. Doesn't mean that individuals were secular. A lot of them were very religious, but the country itself is intended to be secular. And so this God stuff came in the 50s.
Well, the idea the Constitution is there to actually protect those wanting to practice a private faith it doesn't really fit the Fox News persecution narrative. On the switchboard, area code 850. You are on the Thinking Atheist podcast with Monica Miller. Who's this?
Hey, Seth. This is Stephanie. Hey, Monica.
Hi.
Talk to me, Stephanie. What's on your mind?
I called in for a different reason, but Monica just reminded me of a memory from middle school, actually. You just mentioned about my right as a student to not stand for the pledge. And I've been an atheist since elementary school. I kind of found it on my own after being introduced to Catholicism. Mm-hmm. So by the time I was in middle school, I was definitely aware of what I believed and not, and aware of the fact of when God was added to the pledge. And so one day I decided, I was like, you know what? Besides the fact that I'm just tired, I'm not going to stand for this right now. And also I don't have to. Physically, I'm not required to do this. And so I didn't. And my teacher, she didn't say anything to me, but she kind of like gestured like with her hand on her chest, kind of like reminding me, like, just do it real quick. Like it's that time, just do it. And so I did it in that moment, but I remember just being kind of like, I didn't have to do that,
right?
And just kind of not knowing that I could reach out to somebody like you or your organization, or And so I just think it's really awesome that you're here and explaining all of this.
It's weird. Yeah. I was talking to David Neosi about the pledge, mm-hmm. and it used to make so much sense. Of course, you stand for the pledge, and on the other side, when you look at this rote recitation of allegiance, regardless of what your nation is doing, you're supposed to be allegiant and stand with it. It sounds a little more North Korea than you. I mean, is it, Monica? Did you come to a realization, or were you always skeptical of the pledge?
I mean, I don't remember reciting it in my public school in California, in Marin County. I just don't think we did it, so it wasn't something that when I started writing one of our pledge briefs when we filed lawsuits, I think back in like 2011. I was an intern then, but I agreed wholeheartedly with the argument that the rote repetition, even setting aside the God part, is not fostering patriotism. It's really just kind of it's creepy.
It's blind nationalism, really.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I do find it a little creepy.
Stephanie, did you have something else?
Exactly,
I didn't mean to cut you off
agree.
there. Forgive me. Did you have something else?
I guess I wanted to mention that when you were talking about the crosses earlier, I'm in Pensacola, Florida. We kind of have our own cross here. You mentioned that in the past.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people who I've lived here, and since I was a kid, I'm in my mid-20s now, and I was completely alienated. Besides the community and all the churches and it being everywhere, I remember just that park being there and getting there for like another event and seeing that cross there and just being like, oh, okay, this is a Christian park. I guess I'm not really supposed to be here.
Right.
But now that I'm an adult, I can I'm able to let it go, but still.
Yeah. I really, really appreciate you saying that because, we actually, our Pensacola cross case is still pending. And that's the reaction we've gotten from other people like you in that community, which is that they've been bothered by it for a long time, but they've been afraid to speak up because it's such a Christian community. And I personally got a lot of death threats, actually was on Seth's show for this reason 2 years ago, maybe, because I'm an attorney challenging that cross. So totally makes sense why it's intimidating to be there. In fact, when I had my hearing there, I was kind of operating under a white lie when I take Uber drives because I said I was there for like spring break or something because I just was terrified to be identified as the lawyer that was challenging that cross.
I would just want to thank Monica for her time and her efforts towards all of this. Well,
I appreciate you and you calling the show and hanging there down there in Pensacola, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Does Maryland affect the Florida? I mean, I know they're two different states, but does one ruling affect the other?
So that was one of, like I said, the goals going into this case was keeping the ruling as narrow as I possibly could. And I believe that I accomplished that and that the ruling, although, of course, the court, so the Pensacola case is pending before the Supreme Court right now for whether it's going to take cert or deny it or do something called GVR, which is grant, vacate, and remand for reconsideration in light of the ruling that is similar. We are predicting a GVR because the cases subject matter wise, like just on their face, cross, would make sense for the court to say, hey, lower court, we're not looking at the facts of this, but we see it's a cross case, reevaluate it to make sure that it's consistent with our Bladensburg ruling. I think the cases are completely different. The Pensacola one is both the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and the district court had found that its purpose was predominantly religious. It's not a war memorial. It's just a cross. It was put up specifically for Easter sunrise services, Christian services. They do them every single year. Has no other use except for Christian services. So the evidence it's just a very different case. It's a newer cross too. The Supreme Court in our case made many points to say that an older cross is more likely to be upheld than a newer cross and so forth. So yes, I think it's not over. I think we are going to have to do some more briefing in that case, but I do think the outcome will be the same, which is that the Pensacola cross has to come down.
All right. As we wind down here, Monica, you said you're an optimist. I said I'm an optimist. Give me some good news. Like what's going on at AHA or elsewhere that is good? You got anything for us?
Sure. I mean, I have a case coming up. I don't know if I would but I have a case coming up in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals in a month for a humanist prisoner in Nevada that I feel pretty confident we're going to win because he's seeking equal treatment for humanist meetings. He wants to be able to meet on a weekly basis, just like the Jewish group and the Buddhist groups do and all that. So I think it's a good opportunity to be where it's in the 9th Circuit. It's a little bit more progressive, but to reestablish that humanists are entitled to equal treatment. There isn't quite a 9th Circuit case directly on point for that proposition. So I'm enthusiastic to maybe set a little bit of good precedent in that area. Let's see what else is good.
Look at you. She's digging. She's like, okay, let's see. That's one. All right. Look, it's been a discouraging time. It's been for human rights issues. It has been a discouraging time. And I think the reason you and I are sort of wading through this struggle at this moment is because, God, it's like I'm like Picard, when he says damage report, every time I log on to see the morning news, it's like getting hit in the face with a bat. You must feel that as well. I mean, God, when does it end? How bad does the madness get? How fast does does the Ferris wheel go? So do you see any light at the end of the tunnel,
I just the light I see is hoping that this next election cycle, people vote with the court system in mind, because I feel that this would have been a very different case. I don't think the Supreme Court would have taken this case if, Kennedy hadn't stepped down. We didn't have two other appointments. If those appointments had been filled by another justice or another president. I mean, just the smallest, the voting matters on so many levels, but I think the court system especially matters. So my hope is if people will vote, then we can be more hopeful, I guess.
Get active, right? So I got one last call on the switchboard. I want to make sure I don't miss them before we call it a day. I've got area code 732. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Monica Miller. Who's this?
Hi, this is Joel from New Jersey.
Talk to me, Joel. What's going on?
I grew up. I grew up in a religious Jewish home. And I remember as a child, I went to Jewish private schools where we would say both the American Pledge of Allegiance and we would also sing the Israeli national anthem, which I can still remember by heart. And I remember that was incredibly strange, leaving that environment and learning that, there are people who don't do things like that.
Joel, when I was in the school, we would do a pledge to the American flag, and then we would say immediately afterward a pledge to the Christian flag, and then we would say a pledge to the Bible. So they had linked America, right? It's God and country. It was America, then Christianity, and then the Holy Book, the Bible. And I can still recite those pledges from memory. It's amazing how that stuff, it's implanted early, right? Get them while they're young. That was the case for you.
Yep, and I became an atheist. I think between the ages of 13 and 15, when I was still in school. So that was very interesting. But I just wanted to know: is there a real? I mean, is there a legal basis for forcing children to say these things? Like, is there a reason that children, like, are they allowed to do that?
Let me see if I understand your question. Are you saying that is there a legal precedent or law that forces people to recite the pledge, or are they protected by law if they decide not to do it? Would that be a fair way to say what you're asking?
Yeah, that would be a fair way to say what I'm asking.
Monica, what do you think?
So there's two answers to that. One is there's a difference between the public schools and the private schools. So in the private schools, they essentially can have kids recite, I don't want to say whatever they want, but that's completely allowed in our country for private school to have a daily recitation of religious music and so forth. In the public school, every state has a different statute, and I believe most states have a statute on the pledge recitation. So when we filed lawsuits, we're usually going after the statute itself, and the statute might say something like, every morning, a teacher shall lead the class in the morning Pledge of Allegiance, and then it might have the words of the Pledge of Allegiance in their statute, or they might just say whatever the Congress has set as the Pledge of Allegiance. Some states have the language, so it's mandatory that teachers lead the students in prayer or in the pledge, and other states are silent on it. They just say it may be recited, or I don't think every state has a statute that prescribes it, but it's yeah. So to answer your question, yes, there are statutes within states. It's not a federal law. The federal law has the words of the Pledge of Allegiance in it. I think it's a federal statute that was enacted in the 50s when they changed the language, but it doesn't have really operative force. Like, it doesn't say students have to recite this because Congress can't reach that far.
I would think that choosing not to say it would fall under,
right. Well, choosing not to say
right?
it. Yes. I forgot to hit that angle. Yes. In the public school, every student has a right to not participate in the pledge. The the woman who joined us earlier had said that she had a teacher that kind of gave her a look and kind of like, you participate. We would have sent a letter in that instance to say you can't put pressure on students to participate. You can't insinuate that they're out of line if they're not participating. They have a right to sit down. They have a right, to stand up but not say it. There's a lot of gestures that they can do that wouldn't be disruptive. That would be completely within the constitutional bounds. We've seen teachers or principals that have sent students out of the classroom if they are not participating. That's not allowed either. You can't punish a student or otherwise sort of call attention to them for not participating. The teachers really have to just be neutral. You can't do anything that would punish the student. So yeah, there's a lot of rights there. And anyone who's in public school who feels like they've had an issue, especially recently, contact us and we'll send a letter.
In other words, I don't care what you say anymore. This is my life. I don't know why that song been stuck. Joel, thanks for calling the show, man. You take it easy, okay?
You too. Have a good one.
All right. Go ahead with your own life. Leave me alone, like the song says. All right. How do people find you? How do they find the AHA? How do they participate? How do they support? How can they help? And who do they contact if they know of a church-state violation in their own circle?
So I'd say our website is easy to find. It's AmericanHumanist.org. You can reach me if you have a separation of church and state violation at mmiller@AmericanHumanist.org. And I think that is it.
Oh, I'll put all the links as well on the description box, and you can follow her. She's on Twitter and everything. I say this about the people who I follow as an activist who inspire me. I was like, Gail Jordan. Oh, I love you. You inspire me. And Dan Barker recently had a birthday. Dan, I love you. You inspire me. And Monica, you inspire me. You and the work that the American Humanist Association does, it's optimistic. It's proactive. It represents the kind of world I want to live in. It is something I am so happy to support. So from me to you, thank you. Thanks for what you do and for sort of keeping the non-faith, so to speak. And you're greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.